History is rarely shaped in the bright, unforgiving light of day. It is forged in the shadowed, forgotten corners of the world, where empires quietly test the absolute limits of their resolve. For decades, the global geopolitical narrative suggested that the Cold War ended with the lowering of the Soviet flag and the dismantling of the Eastern Bloc, replaced by an era of complex, asymmetric skirmishes and empty diplomatic posturing. But the ghosts of that great global struggle never truly dissipated. They simply migrated to the arid, blood-stained sands of the Middle East, waiting patiently for a moment to challenge the unipolar hegemony of the United States. In the early months of 2018, beneath the starless canopy of the unforgiving Syrian desert, that challenge was audaciously issued. It was a miscalculation of staggering, fatal proportions, born of pure hubris and a fundamental misunderstanding of the lethality and industrial superiority of the American armed forces. This is the definitive chronicle of the Battle of Khasham, a monumental engagement that permanently shattered the convenient illusion of proxy warfare and delivered a violent, uncompromising demonstration of American exceptionalism. It was the first direct, deadly clash between American forces and Russian nationals since the height of the Cold War, and it ended not in a protracted stalemate or quiet negotiations, but in the total, systemic, and unquestionable annihilation of the opposing force.
To understand the sheer magnitude of the industrial violence unleashed that night, one must first comprehend the complex geopolitical chessboard upon which it was played. In the fall of 2014, the United States had initiated Operation Inherent Resolve, projecting its immense military apparatus into the region with a singular, relentless objective: to dismantle the barbaric structure of the Islamic State. As documented in the annals of modern military history, the American campaign was methodical, brutal, and overwhelmingly successful. By 2017, the formidable weight of American military support had enabled the Syrian Democratic Forces to completely shatter the enemy stronghold of Raqqa, pushing the front line inexorably toward the vital artery of the Euphrates River. It was exactly within this rugged geography that a delicate, invisible boundary was drawn, a deconfliction line established between the highest levels of the United States government and the Russian Federation, intended strictly to separate the two heavily armed nuclear powers while they operated simultaneously in the same volatile theater. East of this invisible line, nestled in a vastness of sand and hostility, lay an austere outpost at a Conoco gas plant near the remote town of Khasham. It was not an imposing fortress fortified with high walls, but a quiet, strategic nerve center housing a mere 30 American soldiers. However, a crucial detail went entirely unnoticed by enemy intelligence. These were not conventional infantrymen. They were elite operators belonging to the 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta, commonly and reverently known as Delta Force, accompanied by lethal members of the 75th Ranger Regiment.
These men represented the absolute apex of human tactical proficiency, quiet professionals, rigorously trained to operate in the gray zones of global conflict, where the margin for error is absolutely zero. They rely not merely on brute force, but on a superior orchestration of martial intelligence and ironclad discipline. Supported by a quick reaction force composed of United States Marines and Green Berets strategically positioned roughly 20 miles away, the operators at the Conoco outpost maintained a vigilant, uninterrupted watch over the Euphrates. They did not rely on antiquated trenches, but rather on a sophisticated network of drone surveillance and an unparalleled situational awareness that transformed the dark night into a crystal-clear map of hostile intentions. Across the deconfliction line, however, a very different kind of force was quietly gathering in the darkness. Since 2015, the Russian military had officially participated in air operations designed to prop up the Syrian regime, but their true ground strategy relied almost exclusively on the shadowy, deniable brutality of private military contractors. The Wagner Group, a vast and murky mercenary syndicate, financed by the powerful oligarch Yevgeny Prigozhin, operated with the tacit, unofficial approval of the Kremlin. Their mission was to execute territorial domination maneuvers while providing the Russian Ministry of Defense with an essential layer of absolute plausible deniability.
In early February, This illusion of mercenary stealth began to crumble under the watchful eyes of American military intelligence. At the Combined Air Operations Center, located in Qatar, American analysts observed a slow, deliberate buildup of hostile personnel and heavy mechanized equipment, moving progressively toward the Khasham outpost. As noted in the foundational texts of American military strategy, from the grand mechanized doctrines of the Second World War to the legendary armored sweeps of Operation Desert Storm, the massing of enemy armor is an unmistakable, audacious, and highly dangerous prelude to imminent kinetic action. Over 500 pro-government militia fighters, hardened by years of combat in the Syrian civil war and now heavily bolstered by Russian Wagner mercenaries, were quietly assembling a formidable and arrogant assault force. They did not arrive merely with light infantry. They brought with them the heavy, intimidating, and unmistakable silhouettes of Soviet-era T-72 and T-55 main battle tanks, advancing through the dunes alongside a massive battery of heavy artillery and howitzers. American commanders, exhibiting the cold, calculating tactical patience that defines the lethality of the modern United States Armed Forces, meticulously tracked every single millimeter of this movement on their surveillance screens.
Far from reacting with panic or haste, the American chain of command followed military protocol with flawless precision. Lieutenant General Jeffrey L. Harigian, commander of the United States Air Force's Central Command, utilized the established telephone deconfliction line well in advance, explicitly and repeatedly reminding Russian authorities of the official presence of American troops in that exact sector. The warnings were not subtle. They were clear, direct, and recorded for history. The boundaries were unequivocally defined, but the ambition of the mercenary command deliberately pushed them beyond the point of no return. The trap they had built for themselves, brick by brick in the desert sand, was now firmly set, waiting only for the fatal arrogance of the first shot.
The illusion of mercenary invincibility was violently shattered at approximately 10 o'clock in the evening on February 7, 2018. Operating under the cover of darkness, the Russian and Syrian proxy forces initiated a massive, uncoordinated assault on the chronicle outpost, utilizing a heavy barrage of artillery and mortar rounds to tear through the quiet desert night. The atmosphere was instantly choked with pulverized earth, thick cordite, and the razor-sharp whine of flying shrapnel. The adversaries had foolishly banked on the assumption that a sudden, overwhelming show of localized firepower would intimidate the small American contingent, forcing a hasty and disorganized retreat. It was a catastrophic misjudgment of the men they were facing. The Delta operator
And Army Rangers did not flinch. They simply executed their rigorous training with terrifying, calculated precision. Under the blistering heat of incoming fire, they retaliated immediately, launching Javelin anti-tank missiles that carved through the blackness and began systematically dismantling the approaching Soviet-built armor. Yet even under heavy bombardment, the American command structure maintained an extraordinary level of restraint and discipline. For the first critical 15 minutes of the engagement, American military officials frantically engaged the deconfliction line, contacting their Russian counterparts in the city of Deir ez-Zor and urging them to halt the unprovoked attack. When urgent diplomacy failed to stop the advancing columns, the American operators fired deliberate, highly visible warning shots at a group of hostile vehicles and an active howitzer.
The response from the Russian liaisons sealed the fate of the attacking force. They adamantly insisted that there were absolutely no regular Russian service members participating in the assault. By officially disavowing the Wagner mercenaries and refusing to call off the attack, the Russian command effectively surrendered their own citizens to the unrestrained wrath of the United States military. Once the diplomatic channels confirmed that the advancing army was officially an unrecognized, hostile entity operating outside the bounds of the deconfliction agreement, the proverbial leash was slipped. What unfolded over the next 3 hours was not a battle in the traditional historical sense. It was an industrial-scale execution. It was a flawless orchestration of the most lethal aerospace apparatus in human history, a terrifying testament to the American military doctrine of overwhelming force. The night sky above Khasham, previously empty and silent, was suddenly filled with an armada of high-tech destruction that defies adequate description. Reaper drones, circling silently in the freezing stratosphere, painted targets with unblinking laser precision, effectively illuminating the battlefield for the incoming wrath. Reaper bomber clusters, circling silently in the freezing stratosphere, painted targets with unblinking laser precision, effectively illuminating the battlefield for the incoming wrath.
F-22 Raptor stealth fighter jets, the undisputed and unparalleled kings of air superiority, arrived entirely undetected to violently manage the battle space. They were swiftly joined by waves of F-15E Strike Eagles, heavily armored aircraft purposefully designed to deliver immense, devastating payloads with surgical accuracy. From the upper atmosphere, the heavy, rhythmic, and terrifying drone of B-52 Stratofortresses signaled the arrival of strategic carpet bombing, a chilling and visceral echo of Cold War might brought to bear on the modern battlefield. Lower to the ground, AC-130 gunships banked in slow, agonizing circles, their massive 105mm cannons and rotary chain guns turning the desert floor into a churning, apocalyptic sea of fire and fragmented steel. Beneath them, AH-64 Apache helicopters hunted individual enemy vehicles through the thick, oily smoke, picking off survivors with thermal imaging. From 20 miles away, the deep, rhythmic thud of United States Marine Corps rocket artillery added to the relentless, overlapping barrage. The mercenaries on the ground, who had initiated the attack with arrogant dreams of overwhelming an isolated American outpost, found themselves trapped in a localized, inescapable apocalypse. They were systematically erased by a military force that did not even need to see them with the naked eye to destroy them, a force that operated with a terrifying, detached, and godlike efficiency. While the sky rained unyielding fire, the quick reaction force of United States Marines and Green Berets mobilized to reinforce their brothers at the Chronicle outpost. Their perilous journey was a harrowing testament to American ground discipline and technological advantage. Plunged into absolute darkness, the drivers navigated the treacherous 20-mile stretch of unforgiving desert, relying entirely on state-of-the-art night vision equipment. They operated completely without headlights, moving like heavily armored phantoms across a landscape that was rapidly deteriorating under the weight of the massive bombardment. The dirt roads were littered with the hazardous debris of felled power lines and the massive, smoking craters left by enemy artillery shells. Halfway to their objective, the sheer, concussive volume of the explosive barrage became too dangerous to drive through. The quick reaction force was forced to halt their advance, waiting with grim determination as the American airstrikes and Marine artillery completely silenced the enemy's howitzers and vaporized their armored columns. They finally breached the perimeter of the Conoco outpost at 1 o'clock in the morning. They did not arrive to aid in a desperate last stand. They arrived to bear witness to the smoldering graveyard of a vanquished enemy. The landscape was eerily illuminated by the flickering orange glow of burning T-72 tanks and shattered transport vehicles. The surviving hostile forces, having watched their vaunted armored advantage evaporate into ash in mere minutes, had broken completely, transitioning to a desperate, disorganized retreat on foot into the desolate darkness. When dawn finally broke over the Euphrates River Valley, the absolute silence that followed the Battle of Khasham spoke much louder than the deafening artillery that had preceded it. The final butcher's bill was undeniably stark and historically profound. Between 200 and 300 enemy fighters, including a massive contingent of heavily armed Russian mercenaries, had been killed in the engagement. Countless others were severely wounded, their once formidable assault force completely and utterly atomized. On the American side, the statistics were a defining testament to the absolute supremacy of their training, their technology, and their tactical execution. 0 casualties. Not a single American soldier was harmed. The geopolitical fallout was swift, undeniable, and deeply embarrassing for the adversaries of the West. While the Russian Ministry of Defense released sterile, fabricated statements claiming the incident was caused by unapproved reconnaissance, the brutal truth inevitably surfaced.
Intercepted military communications revealed that Wagner Group leader Yevgeny Prigozhin had allegedly secured direct permission from senior Russian ministers to launch the attack, a desperate, hubristic gamble that had ended in total, unmitigated humiliation. The Battle of Khasham remains a profound, sobering lesson in the uncompromising realities of global power. It proved definitively that while near-peer adversaries may foolishly test the boundaries in the shadows, attempting to directly confront the entrenched industrial might of the American military inevitably results in swift, overwhelming, and absolute destruction.
The dawn that broke over the Euphrates River Valley did not merely illuminate a shattered battlefield. It exposed the harsh, unyielding reality of the modern global hierarchy. The smell of burning diesel, vaporized steel, and charred earth hung heavy in the freezing desert air, serving as a visceral, undeniable testament to the industrial-scale violence that the United States military can summon at a moment's notice. For the surviving Russian mercenaries of the Wagner Group, the morning brought a grim, humiliating task: the frantic collection of their atomized dead. The Russian Ministry of Defense in Moscow, seemingly paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the tactical disaster, was forced into a humiliating posture of absolute public denial. To officially acknowledge the massacre would be to admit that a massive, heavily armored Russian proxy force had been effortlessly dismantled by a mere 30 American ground operators and their aerospace umbrella. Therefore, the Kremlin chose the bitter silence of the vanquished. They disavowed their own citizens, leaving the families of the fallen mercenaries to receive closed caskets in the dead of night, devoid of military honors, state pensions, or public acknowledgement. It was a profound psychological blow, permanently shattering the carefully cultivated myth of Russian mercenary invincibility and exposing the Wagner Group not as a pure military force, but as an expendable instrument of a government entirely too fearful to fight under its own sovereign flag.
To fully grasp the historical weight of what transpired at the Chronicle outpost, one must look back to the tense, hair-trigger standoffs of the Cold War. For nearly half a century, American and Soviet forces stared each other down across the Fulda Gap in Germany and in the skies over a divided Berlin, constantly preparing for a clash of heavily armored titans that thankfully never came to pass. The Battle of Khasham was in many ways the sudden realization of that long-deferred conflict, albeit condensed into a single localized apocalypse. It provided a definitive, violent answer to a question that had lingered in the halls of the Pentagon since the fall of the Berlin Wall. What exactly happens when Russian armored aggression directly meets the sharpened tip of the American military spear?
The answer was not a protracted, grinding war of attrition, but a rapid, clinical erasure of the enemy. The Soviet-era T-72 tanks, once deeply feared as the mechanical beasts that would overrun Western Europe, were effortlessly reduced to burning scrap metal by American technology that had evolved light years beyond them. As noted in the post-action tactical assessments reviewed by top-tier Western military academies, it was a technological and tactical mismatch of historic proportions, proving that the American military-industrial complex had not rested on its laurels, but had spent the intervening decades sharpening its blade to an unprecedented, terrifying edge. Furthermore, the engagement deeply underscored the unique, unyielding psychological profile of the American warfighter. The enemies of the United States often propagate the dangerous, foolish misconception that a modern, comfortable Western society can no longer produce men of iron resolve. The pro-government militias and Russian mercenaries who marched blindly on the Khasham outpost genuinely believed they could break the will of the American defenders through sheer terror and overwhelming numbers. Instead, they collided head-on with the impenetrable psychological armor of the 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta and the 75th Ranger Regiment. These elite operators are forged in the most grueling, uncompromising selection processes ever devised by man.
As detailed in the historical memoirs of elite special operations commanders, men of this rare caliber do not experience fear in the conventional sense. They experience a heightened, crystalline state of lethal focus. When the first heavy mortar rounds impacted the desert sand, The American operators did not falter, and they certainly did not retreat. They calmly calculated trajectories, communicated precise GPS coordinates, and unleashed a systematic firestorm with the methodical demeanor of men who have completely mastered the savage art of war. The geopolitical shockwaves of the Battle of Khasham resonated far beyond the borders of the Syrian desert, echoing loudly in the deeply guarded halls of power in Beijing, Tehran, and Moscow. Global adversaries who had spent decades and billions of dollars heavily investing in asymmetric warfare capabilities were forced to drastically reevaluate their strategic calculus overnight. They witnessed with absolute chilling clarity that the United States military does not fight fair. It fights to annihilate. The seamless, real-time integration of elite ground-based special forces with the most advanced aerospace apparatus in human history creates an insurmountable wall of kinetic energy. The ability of an isolated team of Delta Force operators to instantly conjure the apocalyptic wrath of F-22 Raptors, B-52 Stratofortresses, and AC-130 gunships from the upper stratosphere demonstrated an industrial supremacy that no other nation on Earth can replicate. It was a stark, brutal reminder that while the character of war may evolve with drones and cyber espionage, the fundamental nature of overwhelming brute force firepower remains the ultimate arbiter of global disputes. Ultimately, the Battle of Khasham will be etched into history as a defining understanding that the only reliable, lasting deterrent to global tyranny and aggression is the undeniable, highly visible capacity for absolute destruction. The United States does not maintain the most powerful, technologically advanced military apparatus in the history of human civilization to endlessly seek out conflict, but to ensure that any conflict thrust upon it ends rapidly, violently, and decisively. The ashes of the Russian mercenary column, scattered forever across the Syrian desert, serve as a permanent, chilling warning to the adversaries of freedom. The invisible lines drawn by the United States are not mere diplomatic suggestions. They are ironclad boundaries enforced by an aerospace armada capable of turning the darkest night into a blinding, inescapable inferno. For the mature American citizen, the events of February 7th, 2018 should not merely evoke a sense of fierce, patriotic pride, but a profound structural trust in the quiet professionals who stand watch in the shadows. They are the eternal, unsung guardians of the Republic, ensuring that the American experiment endures, undaunted and unbowed, against the gathering storms of a hostile world. Crafting documentaries with this level of cinematic rigor and historical depth is not a simple task. It requires hundreds of hours of painstaking research, precise visual reconstruction, and relentless editing to ensure these vital stories are told with the absolute respect they command. We refuse to compromise on quality, and we refuse to feed you shallow narratives. But producing independent, high-caliber history comes at a significant operational cost. If you believe that this standard of historical preservation must endure, we need your help to hold the line against the modern algorithm. Please take a moment to like this briefing and share it with those who still value real history. To ensure we can continue this mission without bowing to corporate sponsors, consider supporting our operation directly. You can buy the team a coffee through the link in the pinned comment, or explore our elite membership tiers to actively fund the next major cinematic project. Every single contribution acts as a vital supply line for this channel. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your time, your trust, and your unwavering support. Until the next briefing, stay vigilant.